The sound of the wind hitting the windows of my office barely managed to drown out the deafening noise of my thoughts. It was one of those nights when the cigarette smoke became denser than the air and the shadows seemed to crawl along the walls like old ghosts wanting to tell me secrets I already knew. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how love slowly rotted until it turned into a betrayal that demanded revenge. And boy, did it get it. Mariana and I had been married for 15 years. At the time, they seemed like 15 good years. Not perfect, not all happy, but full of those small victories that make you think things are going well, that life doesn't have to be spectacular to be satisfying. Of course, 15 years is a long time, enough for passion to dissolve into monotony, for conversations to fill with awkward silences and caresses to feel more like a duty than a desire. But I never thought that would be enough for her to look for something more, or, worse still, someone else. Maybe I should have seen it coming, but men like me tend to trust the structure we have built in routine. Work, home, wife, Friday dinners, occasional sex. Everything seemed to be in its place, until one day I stopped paying attention to the details. And that's where the shadows began to form that little by little swallowed everything I thought was solid. The first sign was almost insignificant. Her smile. It wasn't the kind of smile she gave me. Not the shy and tired smile that had accompanied us for years. It was brighter, more alive. Every time her phone vibrated, that spark appeared, lighting up her face for brief moments, as if someone had reminded her what it felt like to feel desired. I wasn't stupid, I noticed, but I decided not to ask questions. Maybe I thought I didn't want to know the answers. And then the message came. I wasn't looking for it, but there it was on her phone, in plain sight, as if she didn't care if I found it. Lucas. That name appeared more than it should, and the content of the message, well, it didn't leave much to the imagination. An invitation to a date that was clearly not work-related, a strange fire that burned more than I could have imagined. I confronted her that same night, not aggressively, not with shouting or accusations. I looked at her from across the kitchen table while she tried to avoid my gaze. There was no need to say much. I already knew. Who is Lucas? I asked with a calmness that surprised even myself. Her silence said everything. Mariana had always been a terrible liar. The way her eyes dodged mine, the trembling hands that played with the edge of her coffee cup. She was cornered, but that wasn't what surprised me. What really hit me was a lack of remorse on her face, as if somehow she had already made peace with her betrayal before even admitting it. "It's not what you think," she whispered at last, as if those words could erase everything she had done. But it was exactly what I thought and more. There was no need for her to explain the details, because in that moment all the years we had shared evaporated. All the happy memories, all the promises we had made, crumbled like sandcastles dragged away by a tide of betrayal. She kept talking, making excuses with phrases that sounded empty, but I was no longer listening. I no longer cared. That night, while she slept beside me, feeling defeated, I made a decision. I was not going to be a fool. I was not going to be the victim. If Mariana thought she could destroy everything we had built without consequences, she was very wrong. And Lucas, well, he would pay his share too. I wasn't going to limit myself to confronting them, shouting or crying. That would be too simple. I wanted something deeper, more permanent. I wanted revenge. Lucas, a name that began to twist in my mind like a thorn stuck deep in my chest. Investigating him was easy. Men like him are predictable. They leave traces wherever they go, confident in their own insignificance. Engineer, divorced, no children. He wasn't a particularly special guy, but he had had the nerve to interfere in my life, and for that, he deserved to pay. At first, I just followed his movements. A routine man. Almost boring. Work, gym, and his usual nights out at the bar, where he probably picked up dissatisfied women like Mariana. I suppose for him it was just another game, but for me this was no longer a game. It was a chess match, and every move I made had to be calculated. Cold, precise. Destroying Lucas physically would have been too obvious. I didn't need to ruin him in every sense, emotional, financial, personal. I wanted him to feel the same as me, that emptiness, that betrayal. I wanted his world to collapse in front of his eyes, for him to drown in the same abyss in which I found myself. So I offered him a golden opportunity. I approached him as just another investor, disguised as success and empty promises. It wasn't hard to gain his trust. I took him to luxurious dinners, introduced him to fake contacts, filled him with illusions about an investment that would make him rich. Lucas, thinking himself smarter than he was, fell completely. He signed everything I put in front of him without asking questions. Men like him, who have always played with other people's lives, rarely stop to look beyond the surface. He trusted me, and that was what would bring him down. While Lucas drowned in a false promise of wealth, I was working on something else, something much more personal. Mariana could not be left out of this. I wanted both of them to suffer, for both of them to feel betrayed. I began sending her anonymous messages, small fragments of the truth about Lucas, carefully selected, photos of him with other women, emails where he hinted at having more relationships. It was like watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. Mariana, who had once sought excitement in another man, was now beginning to doubt her lover. The irony was exquisite. Little by little, the doubt began to do its work. I saw it in her eyes, in the way she began to avoid me, as if everything in her life was falling apart, but without knowing exactly why. It was the same doubt that had grown in me. But this time I controlled it. I could see how every day Mariana slipped further and further into a spiral of confusion, fear, and despair. Lucas, for his part, was sinking into misery. He lost his job after a bad deal. My deal, his debts piled up and the circle of friends he had maintained disintegrated. I found him one night in the same bar where I had met him. He was alone, defeated, drunk. I sat next to him, pretending to be the same man he had known, his supposed savior. I looked him in the eyes as his face fell into his hands, and I told him the truth. There was no big business, no investments. He had just been a pawn in my game. "Why?" he asked in a broken voice. My answer was simple, brutal. "Because you messed with the wrong woman." I left him there with his life destroyed, and then I went home. I found it empty, just as I had planned. Mariana had left, leaving me a short note on the table. A few words, try to explain the inexplicable. She apologized, but offered nothing more than that. Everything I had built was crumbling, but I no longer cared. The walls of the house, which once felt solid, now seemed fragile, as if they were made of paper. The photos on the shelves, the ones that once showed us happy, were mere memories of a past that no longer existed. Every object in that house, every piece of furniture, every little detail, was impregnated with a life that had slipped through my fingers. But surprisingly, the pain did not come like an overwhelming wave. No, only silence remained. A heavy, dense silence, like a blanket that clings to your skin, suffocating. Silence is sometimes more devastating than any scream. Screams, at least, bring release, a catharsis, but that silence does not forgive. It creeps into every corner of your being, echoing the voids that were once filled with words, laughter, and even everyday arguments. The silence in that empty house was unbearable, but not because it hurt me. It was unbearable because it reminded me that there was nothing left to say. Mariana was gone. Lucas was destroyed, and what was left for me? My revenge, yes, I had consummated it. But the only thing I felt now was the endless echo of an emptiness that I didn't even know I had. I sat in the living room, surrounded by that silence, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the pipes. They seemed to be the only witnesses to what was left of my life. I lay back on the couch staring at the ceiling, as if in those cracks I could find some answer, some sign of what to do next. But the answers didn't come. All that was left was to wait. Wait for what? I didn't know. Maybe I was waiting for the pain to appear, for regret to hit me suddenly, but it didn't come. The days began to pass without much meaning. I would wake up and spend hours in the house, just watching life go by from the window. It was as if the world kept spinning at its usual pace. But I had been left trapped in some kind of limbo, suspended between the past and a future I couldn't imagine. I watched people walking down the street, and wondered if they had ever felt anything similar, if they had ever destroyed something only to realize that what remained was an even greater void. One morning, after days of inertia, I decided to go out. The sun was shining. The city was alive and everything seemed oblivious to my inner torment. I walked aimlessly, crossing streets, watching people without them seeing me. In every face I looked for something, maybe a spark of understanding, maybe a sign that someone else understood what I was feeling. But I found nothing, just ordinary faces, lost in their own routines, in their own insignificant dramas. It was a strange feeling to walk among people and feel so disconnected from everything. I ended up in the bar where I had met Lucas. That place had become a symbol for me, a starting point where everything began to fall apart. I sat at the same table, ordered a whiskey, and stared at the glass as if I could find answers at the bottom of the amber liquor. But there were no answers, only silence. The bartender, a guy with a tired face, glanced at me sideways, probably remembering the nights when Lucas and I had shared drinks, but he said nothing, and neither did I. I had learned that sometimes words make no sense when everything has already been said.